All right, it's my pleasure to introduce David Wiens. He wears a number of hats, but he's a co-chair of Strategic Advisory Body. He'll be hosting our next session on the path to net zero, sustainability in the Canadian dairy sector. David has been the chair of the Dairy Farmers of Manitoba since 2006 and a director with the Dairy Farmers of Canada since 2009. In 2011, he was elected to the position of Vice President of the Dairy Farmers of Canada. So I welcome David to the stage to host our next panel. Thanks, David.
All right, thank you, Morris. And it's really good to be here, and it's good to have been here. Just to hear from all the speakers today from the panels. There's so many things that resonate with me and certainly with the organizations that I represent. And so we, of course, going back to February of this year, Dairy Farmers of Canada made an announcement with a goal of being at net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And it was a really big deal. It's an ambitious target. And so we've set that out for ourselves. No, we don't have all the answers today yet, but as was said earlier, once you make the announcement, you make yourself accountable to what you're saying, and it becomes really important to do the ongoing measurement and to actually be very seriously approach this. And we believe that together as an industry we can accomplish it. And so having made the big goal, I would like to introduce our two panelists who will speak to some of these things in much more detail. And so one of our panelists is here on screen, and hopefully if we can, there you go. Okay. So we're going to start. I'll start by introducing Corb Whale. Corb Whale, along with his wife Kelly and Corb's parents Bruce and Deborah, farm in Wellington County in Ontario. Corb is the seventh generation to farm where his ancestors from England settled in 1845. They currently milk 160 cows with an external rotary parlor on 475 acres of land. And the farm is called Clovermead Farms. In 2014, they were the winners of the Dairy Farmers of Canada Sustainability Award for their efforts over 3 generations to meet the 3 pillars of sustainability. Corb is currently a director with Lactanet, with Dairy Farmers of Canada, and Cornerstone Renewables. He has been a delegate with Gailey Foods, a member of the North Wellington CPF, Canadian Parents for French chapter. Corb graduated from McMaster University with a degree in civil engineering, and after graduation spent a year working for Environment Canada at the it's called BAPMON, Background Atmospheric Pollution Monitoring Network lab in Alert at the northern tip of Ellesmere Island. Corb continued as an engineer for 3 more years, traveling to New Zealand for a year, working in the dairy industry, and then through Europe. And he came home to farm in 2000. So that's Corb. Now I'm going to introduce Grant Phillips at the same time. Grant is a highly accomplished consumer goods executive, able to present 2 decades of experience driving growth and expansion in highly competitive markets and regions. An inspiring leader and specialist in the early stage business and turnarounds, he has held full strategic, operational, and P&L responsibility supporting commercial success in locations spanning North America, Asia, Africa, and Europe. He has a breadth of experience across both small-scale operations as well as larger businesses, bringing a unique combination of entrepreneurial and corporate skills with a very strong ability to just make things happen. Much of Grant's career has been with the same organization as it transitioned and repositioned itself in ever-changing global markets. To each business and region under his direction, he has delivered strong financial results by orchestrating a combination of organic growth, re-engineering, consolidation, and diversification strategies. Grant, responsible for the global rollout of specialty dairy ingredients for Vitalis, is delivering a revised R&D focus, corporate marketing, and reinvigorated sales operations in the B2B space. Grant has a postgraduate award in business administration from Warwick Business School in the United Kingdom and a graduate diploma in business from Massey University in New Zealand. His other training includes executive leadership development programs with internationally respected IMD and London Business School. Originally from New Zealand, Grant is now based in the US. He is happily married with a son, a daughter, and 2 lovely grandchildren. And in his free time, he enjoys music, having been in a band in the 1980s, and appreciates great food and travels extensively. So that is a really great package. I'll just say,
I don't know who wrote that. It sounds like a resume.
well, yeah. And I will say too that just for those of you who are aware of in Winnipeg, we have, I guess our newest dairy processing plant in Winnipeg is MDI, and Vitalis is part owner of that. And so they started up a few years ago in Winnipeg, and they are now one of the largest processors in Manitoba, and of course, again, specializing in dairy, in protein dairy ingredients. And so with those introductions, I want to use the rest of our time for the 2 panelists, and I'm going to start with you, Corb, if you want to present, and then we'll go to Grant right after that.
Sure, sounds good, David. Thanks very much for the introduction. It looks like we spent half of our time introducing ourselves, so hopefully we'll get right into this presentation and talk a little bit about dairy farming and what our goals are and how we're going to achieve net zero. Thanks for the invitation. I was lucky enough to get out to Manitoba last week for the Dairy Farmers AGM, and it was minus 31 out there last week. So I'm sitting in the friendly confines of an ice storm in southern Ontario right now. I think I'd prefer the sunny and minus 31 that I left last week. David mentioned that we won the Sustainability Award on our farm in 2014. This is just a quick picture of our farm. We've been working at sustainability on our farm for several generations. It's kind of been a part of who we are. And we really think of it as a 3-pillared stool. You guys, I'm sure, have talked about it extensively today. But it's not only the environment, it's also the economic and the social aspect of sustainability as well. We have to do well for our community. Our businesses have to make money, and they have to be good for the environment so that they can last a really long time. So in the dairy sector, as David mentioned, we have taken the bold initiative of announcing that we will reach net zero by 2050. And that really set our path to discover how we're going to do it and who's going to do it and what partners we need to make to do it. So I'm going to give you a quick little overview of that today. I think this first graph that I've got up is an interesting graph because it's showing our milk production increasing and our total greenhouse gas emissions staying relatively stagnant over the last 30 years. Our emissions per liter of milk has gone down, but overall, our total GHG emissions have gone stagnant. And we always wonder where that comes from. On farm, there are 3 main sources of greenhouse gases. One is the most important is livestock management and enteric methane. Feed production is next, and manure management is the 3rd most important. We represent about 1% of our country's total GHGs and 5% of our country's methane emissions in the dairy sector. And we're lucky in our industry to have done extensive life cycle analysis since 2011. So every 5 years, we do a very detailed life cycle analysis. So we've got good solid data to base these numbers off. And the next one will be released early in the new year after all of the data has been validated. So none of this is a surprise to anybody, the whole farm to table value chain. But what comes as a surprise to a lot of farmers is that 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions are created on farm. So the processor, packaging, milk transport, retail, and consumer are the other 30%, but 70% is attributed to us on the farm. So we definitely have the biggest impact in this supply chain. So lots of our farmers are and people around are asking why. Why have you done this? Why have you made this announcement? Why a sustainability strategy in general? And there are three main reasons. Number one, as you all know, our consumers are demanding it. They're becoming more and more aware of their food. And I like to call them virtuous eaters. Virtuous eaters are looking to be proud of the things they put in their mouth, not have to sneak about it. They want to tweet about it and take pictures of it. So we need to respond not only to the actual threat to the environment, but also to the perception that our consumers have about how their food is being made. The second, obviously, is a series of net zero targets being set by not only our government, by organizations all around the world. And the third, dairy farmers know that sustainability is not a chore, it's actually a decision, and the decision should make us more efficient and ideally more profitable. So we're aligning ourselves with the public sector, not only the Canadian government, but also many jurisdictions like cities and municipalities. The private sector, many of them have announced net zero targets as well. And as major inputs and scope 3 emissions, we need to do our bit to help them achieve their goals. And our consumers see that greenhouse gas emissions is the #1 priority in the dairy industry in terms of environmental materiality. So you can see the others there. As a result, we have made an announcement about net zero by 2050, but there's some subcategories under there that will help us to achieve our targets. Soil and land, water, biodiversity, waste, and energy are all part of it. So our roadmap to net zero looks a little bit like this, and I'm going to leave it after this. I just wanted to give a brief introduction, but we need to be able to leverage and enhance our measurement tools. Some of these exist and some of them don't. There are lots of farmers who want to be able to measure their direct impact on their farm so that they can pick the low-hanging fruit. But also as an industry, we need to collect the data in a verifiable and very straightforward and transparent way so that we can report to our processors and to our governments what we're doing and how we're achieving it. We think that's really important to focus on research and innovation and knowledge transfer. In our latest Dairy Farmers of Canada budget, we put a big priority on all of these areas. And while there's research being done all around the world, sometimes this research really does need to be regionally specific because each environment, each soil type has a little bit of a different twist on what's going to be the most effective in that area. It's a massive country, and we know that not all best management practices will suit all regions of the country. The third is to build strategic partnerships, both with governments and with NGOs. We've got very good partnerships right now with Ducks Unlimited, Clean Farms. We're developing other partnerships with less obvious partners outside of our industry in the energy sector and the financial sector as well. We strongly believe that if farmers are going to take part in this is a voluntary program at this point, that there has to be an economic opportunity for them. There needs to be a return on investment for everything they do on farm. And we have really been trying to change that word sustainability to efficiency. And we think that if we can make farms more efficient by using less resources, the economic opportunities will present themselves rather. The fifth in our strategy is to advocate for a positive regulatory environment. And I'll use the example of feed additives. There's several feed additives that are allowed around the world that actually reduce enteric methane by up to 30%. If you can reduce enteric methane, you can make your feed more efficient. And if there's a positive economic return on that, farmers in this country would happily feed that to their animals to make them more efficient animals and make better use of their feed and ideally less greenhouse gas emissions. And then the last step in this, since this is a 30-year project, it's really important to communicate all along the way about our success. We've got to start from where we are now and continue to tell consumers and governments and processors every step of the way that it takes to get there. It really is not going to do us a whole lot of good if in 2050 we just jump out of a box and say, ta-da, we did it, net zero. So the communication part is going to be really important. I'm going to leave it at that, David, and pass it to Grant. And I've got other slides here if there's some specific questions, but I think that gives us a brief overview. Thank you.
Thanks, Corp. So I'm not going to present. I'm just going to talk on a couple of key subjects here that are important in our business. So first, just to explain the business in a really simplistic way, we take milk off the farms. We then skim off the fat, and that goes into butter. It goes into cream. All of that stays in the Canadian market, primarily because of supply management. So we don't have any exports going on there. And then we take the skim milk and we filter out the protein, and we basically export the protein, and then we have a byproduct stream, which is the milk permeate. So something like 85% of the milk protein that we produce is actually exported outside Canada. So my context is a little bit wider than Canada. I'm kind of looking at this globally and saying what's going on and how do we compete within that environment. I think the first place I want to focus is the word food, because we very often talk about food, but it has a physiological impact and it has a psychological impact. And the physiological impact is important because this is about nutrition. And the efficiency of that nutrition is extremely important when you bring in sustainability into the discussion. Because right now, and if you look at a lot of the measures, and this is something that is being worked on in the dairy industry specifically, where I've seen work being done on a global basis, GHG is measured per metric ton, which in a lot of ways doesn't necessarily drive value in the value chain, but it also doesn't give you a measure of the efficiency of the nutrition. So there was another discussion around PDCAS earlier, which is kind of what I would term as the power of the protein. And that's another area where people are looking at it and saying, well, you may have one protein where the emissions are lower, but the protein's not actually as effective on the human body in terms of the efficacy of that. So the dairy industry is working quite hard on trying to get the measures into this place where you are measuring the nutritional value, and that becomes part of the GHG conversation. So that's just important in terms of the overall context when we talk about food. And obviously things like waste, et cetera, come into play there. The second piece is, what are the customers doing? We at Vitalis are a B2B business. We don't do any business direct to consumers, so everything goes for further manufacturing. And across the board, what we've seen over the last 5 years, but accelerating in the last 2 years, is this need to measure what the footprint is, and it was talked about earlier in terms of people looking at their supply chain. But it's going one step further than that. Our plants are now being audited. There's an additional audit step. We did one in the plant here in Winnipeg 2 weeks ago, which was called a SMETA audit, and that is looking at environmental performance. It's looking at workplace culture, at diversity. All of those ESG elements are being measured within that SMETA audit. And that was something that was actually dictated to us by one of the multinationals. And they said, this is a gate. Before we even start discussing, you need to go through this process of doing this ESG audit in the plant. So this is kind of what's happening at a customer level, and more we're seeing these measures come in, but they're not just looking at sustainability from an environmental perspective. They're looking at diversity. They're looking at a multitude of other things. And then the third piece I want to talk about is that in Canada we don't operate in a vacuum. There is a global industry out there. The dairy industry is hugely globalized. So when you're in that export market, you're really looking at what's happening in other places. I'll give a couple of examples. The European Union is effectively tapped out now in terms of what it can do in milk supply. So they can't grow milk supply because of the environmental laws. The Dutch government announced about 3 weeks ago that they will buy 3,000 farms that are located close to environmentally sensitive areas and take those farms off stream. And the Netherlands is one of the bigger milk producers in the world. So that's actually reducing the available milk. Same in New Zealand. New Zealand, there is now a burp tax, which, well, that's what they're calling it effectively. It's a methane tax that's going into place in 2025, which again will restrict the growth of the milk in that market, and that's a big impactor. So there's stuff happening there in terms of reducing milk supply for environmental reasons. On the other side of the thing, you have the US, which I was saying to someone this morning, the US is going the other way and saying, well, sustainability comes from scale. And I was on a farm in Idaho about 6 weeks ago, and they had 37,000 milking cows on one site. Now, just to put that in perspective, Manitoba has 36,500, something like that. Yeah, so all of the cows in Manitoba in one place. So, but what they've done is they then concentrate that milk, so they halve the transport impact from a sustainability point of view in getting that milk to the plant, because there's enough scale there to do that. They have an on-site digester for all of the manure that is being generated by those 37,000 cows. And there is no conclusion at the moment on what is the best approach. But what we see is that the US is going that way in terms of scale, and Europe and Oceania are going the other way. I think Canada in reality is going to land somewhere in the middle over the long term, as we go through the approach of getting to net zero. So that's just kind of an overview of where we are. Good. You.
Yeah, thanks for that, Grant and Corb. So we'll take a few questions. I've got, I guess, a couple of questions we could begin with. And I know, Corb, you were, I've seen you present before, and it was obviously more lengthy. But if you could maybe talk about, what are some of the steps, what are some of the steps that the industry is going to take to be able to achieve that target that we've set?
Yeah, so in broad strokes, David, I think we're going to be working on a list of best management practices. And it's going to be a living document. These best management practices will ebb and flow over time, but they need to concentrate on some of the areas that I mentioned in my little talk. So one is on animal management. So we need to maximize our feed efficiency, maximize, quite frankly, the biggest reductions we've had, and it speaks to Grant's point, over the years in our industry has been increasing milk per cow. So the less animals we have and the less replacement animals we have, the less enteric methane we're producing on each farm. So there's some low-hanging fruit with crop rotation and feed efficiency that most farms continue to improve at. There's some bigger choices to make on land management, which would include biodiversity projects, no-till, cover cropping, things like that that don't work everywhere, but it's a very good way of capturing carbon and reducing our footprint. And then there's some even bigger ones that result in green energy production. And Grant mentioned a digester on that farm in Idaho. You don't need 37 cows to build a digester. There's a farm near me with 60 cows that has a micro digester. So there's lots of ways that we can produce energy. And ultimately, I think within our industry, Grant uses a lot of energy in his plant, and we can produce energy on our farm. So not only should we be selling him milk, we should be selling him renewable natural gas and start to close that loop a little bit.
Great, thanks, Corb. A question for Grant, and I'll open it up after that. So Grant, I mean, obviously, the dairy industry has become extremely efficient in terms of reducing waste. And what further opportunities do you see that exist, and particularly the dairy industry in Canada?
So, sorry, is the microphone on?
It'll be on soon, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is DPAC are working on a number of areas at the moment. One of those being packaging. Where there's a move to effectively take the plastics out of the packaging, get into fully recycled. That's one area. You may or may not have seen an announcement around a plant to be built in Alberta, which is called Dairy Innovation West. That's important because if you think about the distances in Canada that milk moves, it's actually, as a country, we probably move milk greater distances than anywhere else in the world. And so, you know, our plant in Abbotsford, BC is receiving milk out of Alberta. The plant here in Winnipeg, mostly it's Manitoba, but occasionally there'll be milk comes across from Saskatchewan. So they're building a concentration plant in Alberta. What that'll do is that'll take basically 50% of the water out and reduce the impact of transport on all of that milk that's going into the plants in Western Canada. So these are the kind of things that are moving us forward.
And just to say, when Grant talks about the Dairy Innovation West, it is a filtration plant that takes a lot of the water out of the milk. And so all the dairy farmers in Western Canada have come together and to build this project. And so, I mean, processing doesn't happen evenly across the West, so this allows us to greatly improve the efficiency and reduce carbon footprint in terms of getting milk to where it needs to go in Western Canada. And I'll actually put Kim. I'm going to put you on the spot. Maybe you've got a question or you've got a comment. I know that we've done a fair bit of work together on some of these things. So if we can get a microphone to you, we will. I'll give you a chance because I know you'd wanted to speak before and you missed your chance. So, but just before we go to you and I get a chance to think about what you want to answer, I'm going to go back to Corb for another question. And we do have, dairy farmers across Canada have an assurance program. We call it ProAction. And it does cover, a number of different areas. It includes food safety, milk quality, animal care, biosecurity, and traceability, and environment, of course. And so the latest module that has been completed, and the program is now complete, has been environment. So that's been in effect for a year now. And Corb, in your view, is there anything in the environment module that helped us forward in terms of our sustainability goal?
I think it's a good first step, David. I think the environmental module essentially lets all farmers know the baseline where we expect everyone to be in our industry. It is asking the right questions so that we've got an idea and an inventory on what practices are actually happening on farm and what farmers are willing to do on their farms. I think there's two approaches to sustainability, and Grant mentioned a few of them around the world. Some are using the stick approach, and some of it is the government telling farmers how to farm and how to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And I am a strong advocate of the DFC approach, the Dairy Farmers of Canada approach, is picking a goal, telling the government how we plan on achieving our goal, and looking for their support the other way around. So we have not mandated our farmers to take part in this, but our objective, and as a believer in this, and I know you are as well, David, as farmers who believe in this, we see there's going to be tremendous advantages for farmers to take part. So rather than wait to be dictated to how to solve the greenhouse gas emissions problem, we are going to discover and come up with our own solutions and ideally make those economically viable for our farmers to take part in.
Thanks, Corb. That's an excellent point you've made there. Kim.
I guess I should say thank you, David. So, I guess as a follow-up to your comment, so your approach is to speak to producers or to set goals and then have inform producers of those goals and have it be a sort of a partnership, right, in moving forward. And I'm wondering from the consumer side of things, so we were talking in the last session about consumer trust, and have you seen a response from consumers in terms of just, I know it's been a very brief period of time, but have you seen a response from consumers in terms of your emissions goals? And I guess I'm just going to share a little bit in terms of our experience at the University of Manitoba. So we have worked very hard at our Farm and Food Discovery Center, along with our partners like the dairy farmers of Manitoba, the beef producers, the layers, or the egg layers, that we have worked together to create this center where we can bring the general public. And this last year, I guess this last fall, we had an open farm day, and 1,600 people came to the farm in one day. 2019 was our previous time that we held it because of COVID lockdown, and we had 900 people in a day. So we know there's an appetite for this kind of information. And then, how do we get it out there in a way that's meaningful? We talked about that in the last session, right? Our provincial government has been a big part of our Farm and Food Discovery Center. So I think it's been a great collective. Dory can speak to it. She's been around for that whole time. But, how do we relay that simple message about, for example, these emissions goals? And is the simple language that you've used enough to pique consumers' interests, and what has been the initial response to that? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. So I think your points are all very valid. In fact, I see that firsthand too. We have a farm that is a bit of a tourist farm. So we produce ice cream, and class tours come and people drop in all the time. And if you're able to directly talk to consumers, you can totally see them relating to you once you explain how food is made, or some of the rules that are in place, or why cows have ear tags, all of these things. And I think we have not done a very good job over the years of telling our story. And I don't know if you got to see the campaign this summer. It was our I'm In campaign, and it was our first sustainability campaign done with Dairy Farmers of Canada. And it had farmers from across the country who have taken part in sustainability initiatives on their own. There's been, for the most part, no incentive to do it. They just know it's the right thing to do, and most of them see efficiency. So they've got farmers from across the country. The general message was, we are working at this. We are the first ones on the land to see when things go wrong. So this affects us first, before consumers. We want to make a difference. We've been doing this for years. And that's, I guess the question was, who is going to do all this? And all the farmers from across the country say, I'm in, I want to do it, I'm doing it. And the response from consumers to that ad campaign was massive. We pushed it out towards millennials specifically, but it went very broad for 4 weeks. And I think there's an 88% recognition rate that farmers are trying to do the right thing. And of that 88%, 90% of them said it would change their buying habits in the store. So it's not only that they heard the message, but they planned on acting on it. So I think that's the beginning. And this coming year, we have another series of sustainability-led campaigns. It's going to be talking about specific best management practices. So from manure composting to adding biodiversity. And this is talking to consumers about farmers, but it is real that is happening on farm, and it is vetted by farmers to make sure it is real before we go out to consumers to tell the story. And we're finding our consumers are hungry for those stories. So we're going to keep doing that very methodically and regularly, and make sure that we can spread that message to our farmers as well, that here's why you should be doing it.
Thanks,
Hope that
Grant.
answers the question.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, because I think there's a perception out there that, and let's be realistic, the dairy industry and the meat industry have not done a great job against some of the other areas in communicating how we work on sustainability, how good our products, et cetera, are. But there is something that we're not really looking at, which is dairy, and I'll take dairy in Canada, dairy globally, is growing and is continuing to grow. What is not growing is fluid milk. Fluid milk consumption has been dropping for 20 years, something like that. But dairy overall, and the amount of milk that's produced, is growing. even with, I would say, plant protein doing a much, much better job of communicating. But that milk is appearing in other places. It's appearing in cheeses and yogurts and protein drinks, et cetera, et cetera. The list is very, very long. So it's kind of a wider usage versus how it used to be. And so I see some people in the industry getting hung up on this fluid drop, and that fluid drop, this is all caused by our lack of good discussion around sustainability. It's not the case. Dairy is growing.
Thanks, thanks, Grant. Yeah, certainly people are eating dairy more than drinking it these days, and but they're still consuming dairy. So anyways, I think we are at the end of our allotted time, so I'd like to thank you for your interest in this, and I would also like to thank Corb and Grant for presenting to us this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thanks.